This episode may not be suitable for all listeners. Therefore, listener discretion is advised. Hello, strange ones.
I'm Leasa.
I'm Faith.
And I'm Sharon.
And this is She Sees Weird People.
That's the funny thing.
Hello.
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 How's it going this week?
Swell. It's good over here.
Yeah, we're chugging along.
Barely making it.
Surviving in this heat.
Oh, I'm so ready for summer to be over. I'm a fall kind of girl. I want it to be the fall.
I love the summer.
I might be biased because my birthday's in the fall, but
Same.
My birthday's in the summer, so that's actually an interesting point.
But I don't know, October always makes me feel good, watching all the October movies.
Yeah, I am ready for the hocus pocus of it all. I really am.
Twitches, all the Halloween towns, because you have to.
Yeah.
I'm more of a Christmas person.
What?
What? That's just me, though. I know a lot of people just adore Halloween, but for me, Halloween is like walking around in the dark while my son yells at me about how cold he is.
I always love Halloween in theory, but I don't want to go outside because it's always cold. October 31st, immediately cold. Even in the desert.
Yeah.
I'm just ready to wear my jacket again because I love it.
I know. I wear my hoodies year round, and I just want people to stop looking at me funny.
Honestly, same. Because if I could be wearing a hoodie right now, I would.
And if I could be wearing a princess dress with fairy wings, I would, and no one will let me.
I'm trying to think of what I want to wear right now, and I think it's just these sweats.
You know who else would wear a princess dress with fairy wings?
I don't know who.
Dennis Rader.
I bet he would.
Ricky.
This week's story, I want you guys to hold on, because this is crazy. BTK, bind, torture, and kill. Dennis Rader.
BT Crazy with a K.
Yep, he was a serial killer from the 70s who, this guy fascinates me, completely fascinates me. He didn't fit the FBI profiles. He didn't really fit into any serial killer that they had seen up to that time.
Yeah.
Ooh,
Also,
I'm excited.
Very unattractive. I just want to throw that out there.
Well, let me get started on a little bit of history about him.
Let's do it.
Dennis Lynn Rader was born in Pittsburgh, Kansas on March 9th, 1945, to Dorothea May Rader and William Elvin Rader. He was the eldest of 4 sons. He grew up in Wichita, Kansas, and he pretty much had a normal childhood. There wasn't anything that I could find or that anyone was saying that the way that he was raised was any different than most of the people at the time. He attended Boy Scouts. He was an active member of the Lutheran Church. He was pretty introverted, and he was about I'm going to say a C student, but he was smart. I think if he hadn't have been distracted, he could have been an A student. He attended Wichita High School and later attended Kansas Wesleyan University. He received mediocre grades, and he drops out after 1 year. Then he goes into the United States Air Force, and he's there from 1966 to 1970. On discharge, he moved to Park City, which is a suburb of Wichita, where he worked in the meat department of a supermarket where his mom was employed as a bookkeeper. So it's basically it's a pretty normal life.
Yeah, I was gonna say sounds pretty.
Yeah, it seemed very normal. He was raised pretty normal.
I love that.
Go ahead.
I just love that there's some childhood history on this one.
Yes.
That's my shit right there.
But wait,
it's very hard.
She's like, there's more history.
Ooh.
Dennis married Paula Dietz on May 22nd in 1971, and they had 2 children, Carrie and Brian. I went to school in El Dorado at Butler County Community College, where he also earned an associate's degree in electronics engineering technology. And after that, he went to Wichita State University and graduated in 1979 with a Bachelor of Science degree majoring in the administration of justice.
Okay.
All right. He really wanted to be a cop, but he was unable to get hired on as a cop. So around May of 1991, he becomes the dog catcher and compliance officer in Park City.
The dog cop?
Yep, he was the dog. He was the dog cop and compliance officer.
Okay.
People said he was tough, that he would just like pick on you, basically.
He was like,
I would hate that.
Larding.
Yeah,
because I'd pick on them. Like, all right, Mr. Rent-A-Cop, you couldn't even get in.
and you would. That's what concerns me, is you would, not knowing that the dog catcher just happens to be a serial killer.
Yeah.
Not just a serial killer, a fine torture serial killer.
It'd be me. It would.
We have, oh my god. Let's hope not.
Well, not only was he the dog catcher and compliance officer in Park City, he was a member of the Christ Lutheran Church in Wichita, and at one point he was elected president of the church council. He was...
Yeah, well, everyone seems to have a really good judge of character.
Always. Always.
Oh, this guy was good. He was also a Cub Scout leader, and he participated in his son's Cub Scouting camping trips and activities. Now, I saw a documentary, and I'll leave all this information in the show notes for you, but it was on Discovery Plus, and on this documentary, his daughter Carrie, who, by the way, is lovely, talked about having an extremely normal childhood and how Rader was a pretty good dad. She said he was boring and quiet and provided well for them. He was very hardworking. They were all very involved in the church. His dad spent a lot of time with them. Home was fun. And she really struggled to reconcile the father with the monster. It was hard for her.
Yeah, well, I mean, it makes me think of, like, when there's a child molester within the family or, like, the friend group, and people, like, won't even believe something happened when kids say so, because you just can't see that behavior coming from that
someone
person.
You've known your whole life, you know?
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense, because they would never show socially unacceptable behaviors.
Well, Dennis Rader is definitely the guy that you would say, shows the world that people are way more complex than they want you to know.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like it.
I mean, because just imagine...
How do you go from this?
Right, because this guy, he's perceived to be a pillar in the community, acquaintances, his family, and inside, he's privately wrestling with the urge to commit extreme, sexually motivated torture and murder.
Yeah, it sounds like maybe he's, like, compensating, maybe, like...
He had, you hear about a lot of serial killers not having, and they always say, I can't control it, I couldn't stop it if I wanted to, I don't have any impulse control, but...
I would kill again.
Dennis Rader does. He has a lot of control. He's calculated and meticulous. And he studied serial killers and made a decision to be like them. He wasn't... he had the urges, but he acted on these things in a way that was more... It was sick.
Well, if you hear my little pin scratching, it's because I'm writing down the question, does Dennis have control?
We'll see, I guess.
because either he has an illusion of control because he really needs it, or he really is a controlled human being. But I don't know a lot of serial killers who are truly great with impulsivity control. I also don't know a lot of serial killers in person.
I don't know any, but if I did,
I really would hope not.
From my reading materials.
one of the things I want you to remember is that he went to college to study criminal law procedure.
Yeah.
And so he did it not only because he was trying to get a job, but also because he was trying to get better with his crimes. And he wanted to get away with them.
Yeah.
All right,
I mean,
go ahead.
It's a great way to steer people away from thinking that you would do something dark.
Right. All right, so let's talk behaviors. Facts and science, that kind of thing first, because I want to separate the victims from... We'll cover the victims later, but I want to talk about the behavior separate from them because I want the victims to be people in this and not just victims.
Yeah.
Sometimes I feel like our victims get lost in our fascination with the pathology of a serial killer. And I really want to regard them with respect and see them as individuals with autonomy, I guess is the word I'm looking for, outside of the crimes that were committed against him.
That's the thing.
He reportedly grew up with what he said was a very loving home. He was close to his dad, his mom, and his brothers. He grew up on a farm where he would play cowboys and Indians with his brothers in barns and the silos. Now, they would tie each other up while playing. I remember when I was a kid, my cousin tied me to a pole one time and left me there. That was fun. But kids do that kind of thing. But to Dennis, this was sexually arousing. And he would later use bondage on himself in those silos and fantasize about building a sexual fantasy silo so that he could commit crimes against women in those places in private.
My question is, why would he find that arousing? Like, what has happened in his life that he would be aroused by violence? Or because there's kink, which is totally fine, and then there is like sexually violent behavior. I wonder if it escalated from a kink. I don't know. Who knows? Carry on.
One of the things that he tells a story about is how his mother got her ring caught in the spring of the couch while she was cleaning one time. And she tried to get her hand loose and whatever, and she could not get away from it. She couldn't get out of this predicament she was in. And the look of helplessness and fear on her face was the look that he aimed for on the faces of his victims. He said that was it was a stopping moment for him.
Yeah, which is telling. Yeah, it's really telling, because who looks at their mother in pain and can find joy in that moment? Or
say, I like that. Like, you know, like.
Yeah, it was arousing to them in that way. I mean, most people you'd be worried about your mom. You wouldn't be thinking about that.
What can I do? Not.
Yeah, like, why is he not trying to help her escape the couch? That's what I want.
She did finally send him next door to the neighbors to get some help, but he just stood there staring at her for the longest time. I mean, I always say that if I was like, that my kids, when y'all were little, teenagers mostly, is that I would be like struggling to get in the house with 18 bags of groceries and everyone would just watch me. And I would be like, help! And no one's coming. So I don't know if it was that kind of a situation for him, and this was the result of that, or if he just really took joy in it, and I'm not sure. His first actual sexual fantasy that he acted on was this teacher that he didn't like. And he claimed like she would like pick on the kids that were weaker than him. And it was his fantasy to have dominance over her. I mean, he was like a peeper, and he would spy on her at her house while masturbating. And that's the beginning of the Dennis Rader mystery.
Yeah.
Now, at some point, he practiced hanging and binding cats. Even building...
always cats. It's always
I know,
cats.
always cats. He would build a torture box to kind of trap the cats, and he said that the ropes and the hanging of the cats was sexually arousing to him.
What the hell?
Yeah, what the hell?
Yeah, that's a problem sexual behavior if I ever heard one.
Well, I don't understand that one at all. Like, not even a teeny tiny little bit how that's arousing, but whatever.
I don't get it either. It's so strange. Really is a strange thing. According to Dr. Catherine Ramsland, and she was the professor of forensic psychology who wrote the book based on research, and she did hours and hours of interviews with Dennis Rader. She highlights Rader's paraphilia, which is abnormal sexual desire coupled with a penchant for carrying out reckless deeds. And for anyone who doesn't know. Specifically, his obsession was with specific knots and how to tie them, and the rope itself was sexually arousing to Rader. And in addition to this, she called it a subparaphilia. Does that sound right to you, Leasa?
I mean, yeah, I would say so. I mean, it's not something that's going to be just like listed forthright in the DSM.
Right. Erotophonophilia is what she called it. And I don't know why I need all these big words, but I am sharing them with you because they're interesting.
Also say that 5 times fast.
That's what I was...
I practiced. It's an abnormal sexual desire coupled with murder fantasies and sometimes real murders. And forensic psychologists also call it lust murder.
Yeah. Erotophonophilia.
Okay, now I've been reading this book by John Douglas. This is the FBI Mindhunter guy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm right in the middle of it, and it's such a good book. Oh my gosh, it's hard to put down.
Yeah, I'm excited to read that.
But what he said in this I thought was very interesting. Behavior is the way someone acts or conducts themselves. Modus operandi, or the MO, is Latin for mode of operation. It's the habit of working. And MOs can change as criminals learn from their mistakes, or life events happen, or they age, or whatever. But that can evolve. But a criminal signature is a ritual. It's an act that has to be carried out to commit a crime, almost like a habit. It's something he cannot really break, and it does not change. Now, for Dennis Rader, bind, torture, and kill. And he had to complete all 3.
Yeah.
So
and he, from what I read, he really had to complete all 3. Like, he was considered to have obsessive compulsive disorder.
Yes, he was meticulous.
Yeah.
Well, that's even worse.
If this guy's coming for you, you're dead.
Well, OCD is incredibly hard to deal with as it is. Like, the thoughts that get stuck in your head and go on repeat. And so I'm just thinking, like, to have that intermingled with violence is really, really scary. Yeah, it's super scary.
Okay, now, this guy, he's also a narcissist. A big-time narcissist.
Yeah.
Okay, he gave himself his own serial killer name. His actual signature behavior is his name, and his MO and his behaviors evolved, and they were kind of hard for me to sort out because this rope thing was so important to him. So I know that's definitely a part of his signature. It's just really more complicated than other cases that I've studied, because he didn't fit into a typical serial killer profile for the 70s. I mean, if you think about Richard Ramirez, he was like terrifying. He had crazy hair and wild eyes, and he was chasing people in the night with satanic symbols on his hands, and it was during the middle of the satanic panic and all the stuff that was going on in the 70s and 80s.
He was a psychopath, like, for sure, like narcissistic, all of those things, antisocial. But you add this sounds those guys like present with like a flat affect, right? So like Richard Ramirez, like, well, except when he was smiling, but like he just doesn't really have a lot of emotion about what was going on there. He just doesn't give a fuck, frankly. And then you have BTK, and he it's not that he gave so many fucks. He was extremely narcissistic, very antisocial. But when you add that layer of obsessive compulsive onto it, it's like a different, there's a lot of care put into it. It's not so flagrant, if that makes sense, because there has to be that care put in it by, it's pathological.
And if you're in the 70s and you're a detective who doesn't have a lot of behavioral analysis tools that they have today, and you're looking for Richard Ramirez instead of Dennis Rader, you're gonna have a little more difficult time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can't even be mad at their assumptions. But I mean, yeah, like mental health was not like as understood. It was hard enough to get a behavioral health analysis unit in the FBI to be taken seriously.
Right. But now they have like these huge protocols they follow, and they have really people who specialize in different kinds of criminals, so that they can write lists like, here are some of the strongest traits of serial killers. And I got this from the Big Book of Serial Killers. There's a Big Book of Serial Killers, written by I think it was Jack Rosewood. I have it in the notes. But these are some of the strongest traits of serial killers. They're smooth talkers, but completely insincere. I think Ted Bundy.
Narcissism.
Egocentric and grandiose. They have a complete lack of remorse or guilt. The lack of empathy. They're deceitful and manipulative. They have very shallow emotions. They're impulsive. They have really poor behavior control. And they have a need for excitement. Like, remember when we did Albert Fish and he was writing all those people, those awful letters and stuff like that?
Yeah, and he couldn't stop himself.
Yes. Total lack of responsibility. It's like a narcissistic immunity.
Yeah.
They usually have early behavior problems, and they almost always have adult antisocial behavior.
Yeah, which he's interesting because you can hear the extreme narcissism of Dennis Rader, but he tries to hide that antisocial part of himself, which is clearly there, but like him having kids and a family and the kind of jobs, like he tries to blend.
And he did quite well, because he avoided the cops for 33 years.
Well, yeah.
How long can you avoid yourself? I'm just kidding.
No. Rader's behaviors started at a young age. Like, he was having sadistic sexual fantasies about torturing trapped and helpless women at a very early age. He also exhibited zoo sadism by torturing, killing, and hanging and strangling small animals. He acted out sexual fetishes for voyeurism, autoerotic asphyxia, and he was a crossdresser. He took pictures of himself bound and wearing that creepy-ass porcelain mask that I'm sure you've seen pictures of. Ugh.
I have.
No, I gotta look this up right now.
Oh, you gotta look this up. This is so creepy.
Yeah.
Yeah, the pictures that you see are not of other people. They are of himself wearing this female porcelain mask. He figured out how to get his camera to how he could like use this little device he created to make his camera take pictures of him while he was bound up.
The one of him in the chair? Is that him? No. Is it? It's Fox News. Maybe it's this one.
He would often spied on his female neighbors while dressed in women's clothing. Like, he would wear his wife's underpants or his victim's underpants, whatever, and including stuff he'd stolen, and he'd masturbated with ropes and other bindings around his arms and his neck.
He wanted to feel what his victims felt. I was going to say, that's all fantasy right there.
Yep.
But find a better way to express your fantasies, sir.
Now, there's this other guy. His name is Scott Bond. He's a PhD writer for Psychology Today.
Okay.
He's like I'm like a big fan. I love his work. I love his articles. He wrote Evolution of a Serial Killer. Now, Dr. Tony Rourke, a forensic psychologist who evaluated Rader following his arrest, believes that something must have happened early in Rader's life to spawn the BTK killer. Just like you said earlier, something's missing from the story.
Yeah, for sure. Especially like with the fact that it's like he's got people that he's directing this at. It's women, clearly, because of the way that he's fantasizing, and then the thing with his mom. And you don't fetishize violence without seeing it at some point, or seeing it, feeling it, experiencing it in some kind of a way.
Scott said that Dr. Rourke made the statement that if Rader was completely honest, which he is not, I am sure that we would find some sort of childhood event that Rader immediately associated with feelings of sexuality. Somehow, very early on, Rader encountered an event where he immediately linked sexual pleasure with watching a living creature suffer and die. And after that first encounter, Rader probably began to work very hard to nurture those feelings.
Yeah, to recreate it.
Yeah, so just what you just said is what they said too.
It's like anything else. You don't learn how to use a spoon without watching someone else do it and then picking it up and practicing. You learn these things from somewhere, and the things that you learn in childhood they're pretty deep up in there. That sounds gross, but it's true. With him having like these thoughts that he nurtured, I think that OCD typically comes from needing control, like as a kid. Mm-hmm. And so he must have felt out of control in some kind of way, or fearful or anxious or something like that. And then he sees something and he starts nurturing it, and that probably, OCD ties into that too. That's where like probably the obsessive behavior began. And I would wonder, my next question would be like, what other rituals did he have outside of that?
Well, when he first started all this, his MO was basically non-existent. I mean, he had to develop that. And the more he killed and the more he started off, they say, his first kill was a whole family. And then he went on to target older women who would be alone and whatever. So I'm not really sure that he knew what he was doing, but he knew enough that he was able to control a family of 4. He was able to find a way to do that. So nurturing, you're right about how he experimented with manipulating people to do what he wanted, being able to use rope to bind them and do the things that he did.
Finding out who his ideal victim pool is, so that like...
No, he didn't go from 0 to 60.
No.
There had to be something in between that nobody has reported at this point. He would do things like, like he would pretend to be a government official or a telephone repairman to gain access into their houses, and then he would tell them, I'm just going to tie you up because I'm a weird guy with a sexual problem. And then after he got them tied up, he would mention to them, I'm just going to have to kill you, just to see the panic in their eyes.
Yeah.
Just to see that look on their face that his mom had on hers.
Yeah.
And after all of his killings were done, and he was basically forgotten because he went off-grid for a while, he began his most infamous of signatures. He started doing drops, which would include things like handwritten accounts of the killings and pictures of the actual acts. He would send pieces of their jewelry or their driver's licenses, his trophies, and he would send them in to prove who he was.
Yeah, and that's part of that narcissism and grandiosity.
Y'all can't catch me.
But there's also the whole part of like, look what I've done. And I read somewhere that he called his murders and his acts of violence accomplishments. So he's bragging.
He called them projects and accomplishments. His accomplishments were after he had completed them. Before, they were projects. People were projects.
Yeah.
Wow.
So yeah. I wonder who he was a project for.
I think that the reason he made it so easy for cops to finally figure out who he was because he had to complete it. And he wasn't going to be complete until the whole world knew who he was.
Yeah, he's like a whole bunch of symptomology that is scurry.
He was totally obsessed with the attention that he got from his killings and the power he felt by terrorizing the whole community. Everybody was scared to death. And he eventually became so proficient at stalking his victims, he would do it for weeks at a time before breaking in, and he would wait for hours in their houses until they came home. He gained so much sexual pleasure from their terror and pain and watching them struggle that he would often masturbate at the sight of their torturous deaths and then leave his DNA at the crime scene. He did a lot of things that made it possible to catch him.
Yeah, and it sounds like anything that he does that like made it possible to catch him, like were things that like kind of okay, he's out there looking for power and control in some kind of a way, and then he goes into their houses hours before and like hangs out and in this really arrogant way, and that's just like that in itself is like, oh, look at all this power and control I have. I'm in your home. I'm taking over your personal space.
And all the anticipation building up till they get there.
Yeah, it's sick.
He never raped anyone. He never penetrated anyone. He would masturbate over there. He wasn't interested. He thought that was going too far. He was not interested in actual sexual,
That's interesting.
Yes. He would just masturbate over he'd watch them die, and that was enough for him. Watch them struggle to breathe, watch them struggle, watch their terror. And that's how he did it.
Now, either he wasn't interested or he couldn't.
That's true. That could be.
For whatever.
But he had 2 kids. So, I mean, at some point he was having sex with someone, with his wife. He had children. It was just, I'm sure that she wasn't going to provide. She was a good Lutheran woman. I'm sure she wasn't going to provide.
And that was all an act and a front.
After a while, and the cops are looking for this guy everywhere, and they just can't find him. He doesn't have any prints in the system. DNA was very young at the time. There was no idea, so they call in the FBI, right? And they develop a psychological profile. The FBI determined that the BTK killer was likely an organized and intelligent individual. Okay. They believed he had knowledge of law enforcement. Mm-hmm. He possessed a certain degree of narcissism.
Check.
This profile helped investigators focus their efforts and narrow down their search for the elusive killer, but it wasn't 100% accurate because it also stated that he would be single. Now, it was on point in some respects, but it made it more difficult for him. This is what I mean, is they were looking for someone no one else would have. They assumed he would be single, and he was not that guy.
Yeah, and it's early on in profiling, and he's a little atypical compared to some of the other serial killers that they have profiled, like that are very just like cold, like maybe just not as much, not as complex maybe, and psychologically.
Yeah, and he wasn't a frenzied killer. he was very much in control of when and whom.
Yeah, no, he couldn't be a frenzied killer. That was.
And he took breaks, so.
Yeah, this is interesting. According to my friend Scott Bond, about his personal correspondence with Dennis Rader from prison, he said, quote, Rader used autoerotic fantasy and masturbation aided by his motherlode of trophies from his victims to relive his crimes and satisfy his sexual cravings in between murders. And as a result of his autoerotic fantasy life, the length of time or cooling off periods between his murders was highly variable and generally much longer than most other serial killers. Incredibly, Rader takes credit for his fantasy rituals and even claims that they saved lives.
Whose lives?
His potential victims.
So, like, if I get a couple, it holds me off from doing way more?
Yeah, that's what he's saying. He's saying that if he told this guy if he would have likely killed more people if he had not discovered a way to satisfy his urges.
With the trophies? Oh my gosh.
And one of his letters to authorities, he wrote, I can't stop it, so the monster goes on, and it hurts me as well as society. Society can be thankful that there are ways for people like me to relieve myself at time by daydreams of some victims being tortured and being mine.
Yeah, and that doesn't show awareness to me. That shows another, like another screenshot of his narcissism.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's not for anybody else. It's all for you. And he probably had to have some kind of ritual with those things that he collected, and he makes it seem like he's doing something for society.
Yes, that's what he's saying. That's what he's saying.
I jerked off to this necklace for you,
and he says it with a straight face. If you've ever seen any interviews or heard any interviews with him, or even saw him when when he finally confessed to his crimes in court, he does it all with a straight face, like he's talking to you about the day he went fishing. Now, his behaviors during his crimes, specific to Dennis Rader, were as follows. He would stalk and study his victims. He would call his victims projects, and he gave them code names. He would tell his victims elaborate stories about why he was there. He would hide inside their homes for hours for them to arrive or for company to leave. Sometimes people would be in their own home with a friend or something, and he would just wait patiently until the other person left. He was not a physical rapist. To him, that was going too far. He would masturbate, however, after watching them die or after they died. He was definitely a sexual sadist, and he would kill and masturbate over bodies, which indicates a type of necrophilic behavior.
I don't think it does indicate that. I don't think that it really bothers me. I don't think that he couldn't, or that he wouldn't sleep with, or rape. I think he couldn't do it for some reason, whether it's mental, physical, an anxiety about it that won't allow him to get that far with somebody that can see him, that's living and breathing. I don't know.
Well, or maybe this is just a thrill thing for him, and so I feel like that's not part of the thrill for him.
Yeah, I think it's that's not why he was there. His point was to watch them die so he could get off on that specific thing. It's very creepy.
Yeah,
Okay, he also kept meticulously typed records of all of his kills and methods and his hiding holes for his kill kits, his trophies, his records. He even made the lady who did his memoir, that doctor, he made her a map of where his hidey holes were.
I don't put that much effort into anything.
Right.
For real, Jesus Christ.
He was obsessively organized. You're right, Lisa. He was absolutely OCD.
And narcissistic. He organizes it and needs it to be recognized.
Yes. He strangled Scott and stabbed his victims, and he hung them as well.
I feel like that just makes it so much more scarier when they're yeah, I did all this, go check it out.
That's exactly who he was. You're getting a very good picture of who Dennis Rader was.
Yeah, it's a complete lack of empathy.
He took many trophies and photos so he could relive his fantasies and crimes. and he worked out of town a lot. So at one point, he became a census taker, and he would spend a lot of time in hotels. And that's when he would have what he called his hotel parties, where he would dress up in women's underwear, sometimes in his victims' clothes, and lay the pictures of the victims in front of him. And sometimes he would use a doll or whatever, and he would tie and bind himself up, put on those terrifying porcelain masks, and relive his kills and invent new fantasies of killing and stalking. I mean, he would just go to these hotels, and he had this whole kit that these weird ass things were going on in this hotel room, and you're next door watching. You're next door watching a movie.
Just imagine he's like, well, maybe this position. Like, it's not funny, but like just imagining him in the room, like with this mask, these women clothes. He's like, well, this position or this.
That's exactly what he did.
You know.
You have to laugh at some of it, and like because when you look at his pictures of himself that he took, like he looks like. Oh, it reminds me of a world wrestler for some reason.
Yes, you know what? I thought about that too, because when I first saw the pictures, I had to look at them 3 or 4 times. And I'm like, that is the weirdest thing I've ever seen in my life. He did it to himself.
Exactly.
Sometimes he would, when he was with his victims, he was all about reliving and reliving and reliving. He would suffocate and strangle his victims, and then he would revive them and do it again.
Oh my God.
Or
That's
strangle them until they
horrible.
passed out and wait for them to wake up and do it again.
Yeah.
That's common though, because
Common in who, Faith?
like with a lot of the serial killers though, like that, like fantasize about that, like that have the necrophilia and all that.
I think when it comes to that, what it often has to do with is the complete control.
Yeah.
Like dominance, complete domination and control. And just to put it out there, not to be like weird or offensive, but there are people that have fantasies and kinks and, different things that they're interested in that are, similar to that. You can dress up and you can, have whatever kind of fantasy you want if it's a fantasy that has to be like contained to a socially appropriate area.
And it's not aggressive or like.
Yeah, there's a huge difference, and so I don't want to I put that out there because I wouldn't want to ever shame anybody, but there are this is different.
It is different because as the doctor stated earlier, this wasn't just a fantasy about cross-dressing or bondage or anything like that. I mean, those things, you have a safe word, you do the things, right? I wouldn't know, but if I did, I would have a safe word. It would be a big, long one. But
I recommend a safe word.
Like what? I want to know your safe word.
Well, it can't be yes, no, stop, or go. I mean, it can, but you really want to have something specific that means that's enough, sir. And I'm not talking about my own self. Just I'm saying, and if you're gonna,
we're all getting nervous here.
Well, I work in sex therapy, and I'm just saying.
I know you do. That's why it's fun to mess with you, but
you got to keep yourself and others safe, right? If you're going to do things that are fantastic.
And it can't be something that you'll say like commonly, so it's got to be like elephant.
Right.
Yeah, like what if part of your fantasy is saying no or stop, which we don't have to talk about it. But yeah, don't use those words usually.
But his thing was that he was not done. He couldn't stop until the person was dead.
Yeah.
Okay, so that is how far his fantasies went, and he had to complete them. That's the thing. Even though he confessed to killing 10 people, and he pled guilty to those 10, and he stated in court how it went, some law enforcement, as do I, believe that there were more, and I'm about to tell you why.
I believe there was more too. This guy's just like, whatever.
Oh, yeah, you don't become the circus of a man without, yeah.
So, in 1974, Dennis Rader could no longer contain his fantasies, and he committed his first known murder on January 15th. the Otero family. Joseph 38, Julie 34, and the children were 9 and 11. Now, Charlie Otero was a sophomore in high school, and he comes home after school, and he enters the front door, and he sees two of his siblings in there, and they're just panicked. And little Danny and Carmen, who insisted that their parents were playing a really bad joke. And Charlie walks into their room to investigate, and he found his parents' bodies in their room.
Yeah, I'll never forget this particular part of a story. You know, some of them just stick with you, and that one's so sad to me.
Yeah. Well, he didn't expect, he was going after Josephine, who was 11, and the mom.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't expect Dad to be home that day, but Dad had a car wreck a couple days before and like cracked his ribs. So he was just off that day healing up. And it was a little harder for him to subdue Joseph. And he put the rope around his neck, he put a plastic bag over his head, and then he went on to do the same thing to the mother. But Joseph chewed through the bag.
Oh yeah, he did.
So he then put something else over his face. And Charlie had assumed, little Charlie Otero, well, he wasn't little, he was a sophomore in high school. He assumed that his sister Josie and Joseph Jr. were still at school, but when the police arrived, they found the bodies of both children. And Joseph was in another room, and he had been strangled. And Josephine, who they called Josie, was found hanging in the basement from the pipe.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
That's horrible.
This is where his fantasies about the cats came in. He did the same thing to her. And his DNA was found on her and near her.
And she's so little.
This is the part that this is, I mean, this is why I hate Dennis Rader.
That's why? It's the only reason?
It's just, it is that he has no feelings for anyone else.
It's disgusting. Like, how can you do that? Like,
I mean, you can do whatever you want to yourself, you weirdo, but don't, I mean, this family. And this is what I'm talking about. How do you go from 0 to full speed? From not committing any crimes to suddenly subduing a family of 4? I don't think so.
Yeah, this whole family.
No way is this his first kill. I don't believe it. I just think that he didn't report the other ones because he wasn't proud of them.
I agree with that because he was so narcissistic. And yeah, you got to get, like, for lack of a better term, you got to get your feet wet in that somehow before you take it, like, to any kind of, that's so hardcore. And it really does speak to his lack of empathy.
If you can, it's hard to even imagine what this family went through.
Well, literally the way that he does everything is he puts people on display.
Yes, he does.
He shows what he did, like Josephine, like he's like, look at this.
To me, imagining what happened with the kids, first the little kids come in and they find their parents dead and they think they're just playing a joke, this isn't for real.
Yeah.
And how that affected them for the rest of their lives, and how Charlie was affected for the rest of his life because he comes in and finds he's the man of the house now. He's taking care of everybody the best he can.
Yeah.
And how the cops must have felt going down in the basement and finding that little girl. And walking into the bedroom and finding this tiny boy killed pretty much the same way his father was killed.
Yeah, and what horror is that? Because you hear about serial killers all the time, especially now. People love true crime. They love to talk about it. But to be honest with you, you're not going to meet somebody that just doesn't give a fuck like that very many times in your life.
Mm-hmm.
On a scene that person left.
And I want the Otero family, I mean, I want all of these kids, I want everybody to know. I want them to know that even though, we're telling people about this horrible person, that they are the most important part of this story. They matter the most.
They're all that matters. He doesn't fucking matter.
That's right.
You lose that right whenever you, I don't even need to name God.
And that is where I'm going to leave you with part 1 of the BTK killings.
Well, that was a lot.
I know she was with Josephine, and then she's like, I gotta bounce, y'all.
Yeah.
Deuces.
I just want to close my eyes. You just...
Mom, leave us on that ledge.
If you can just imagine, holding on to those babies if you could, it just... Anyway, we'll see you in part 2, because we came.
We saw.
We heard some really weird shit.
Some really dark shit. I hate this man.
I know. That one kind of brought the mood down, but it's still a great story.
All right, we'll see you guys next week with part 2.
All right, see you then.
Bye.
Bye.
That's the thing.
I'm Leasa.
I'm Faith.
And I'm Sharon.
Join us next time on She Sees Weird People. Thank you so much for listening. If you have a weird story to tell or case idea, contact us at weirdpeople@sheseesweirdpeople.com. Be sure to hit that subscribe button wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us on Instagram and Facebook at She Sees Weird People Podcast. This podcast was written, hosted, and produced by Sharon Metcalf, Faith Denovit, and Leasa Metcalf. Produced by Sedona Brave Studios. Music by Purple Planet Music. Sound effects by Pond 5.